All right, Peter, we're
Hi.
at it again. How you doing?
We are good. Doing well. What's up?
It's been some time.
Yes.
I got a little bit of family vacation, which was nice, and then we jumped in. So it just had a few weeks where we weren't able to record anything. But it's good to be back with you, and I think we can jump right into this topic without bantering too much and wasting people's time.
Sure. My wife actually told me, just jump right in next time.
Yeah, stop bantering. Stop bantering. You guys are not that funny. So.
Well, yeah, today we're going to be talking about postcolonial theory on the book that we are reviewing, Lindsay and Pluckrose, Cynical Theories. And today we want to just talk a little bit about postcolonial or decolonization. And you've probably heard that before, decolonization. You've probably heard of movements called disrupt the texts or decolonize white texts. So what does that really mean? What does it mean to decolonize the curriculum? And this is kind of a movement, according to this book, that really draws heavily from some neo-Marxist culture, as well as Michael Foucault, James Derrida, Edward Said, and some critical educational theories. And what they're wanting to do is they want to show how white Western culture has kind of convoluted and through the colonization of their own radical, basically takeover of some of these poorer countries, has led to these poorer countries having kind of traditions of, I guess, white mindset. So when somebody takes over a tribe, for example, decolonization, or excuse me, people that believe in decolonization would say, you don't just change the people, you actually change the mindset of the people. And what decolonization curriculums often want to do is get rid of that colonization, the original colonization, and try to find the source of that particular tribe or people group, so that we could understand, their literature, their science, give them time and space. It was really created right around, well, of course, right after the 1940s and 50s, really came out in the 50s and 60s. And just like most postmodernism, gained a lot of stream, mainly because of World War II. Postmodernism, I think we always have to understand, you're probably going to hear me say this a lot, is seriously a huge reaction to the devastation that World War II caused. So it's a pendulum shift. And I don't ever want to don't ever want that to happen again. And so as Britain was colonizing the world, it became significantly a lot less popular within just a few years, honestly, about 10 years. And the purpose of this movement really is to create justice, at least as it understands the concept internally, so that the justice for marginalized social groups or constructed groups instead of individuals, to give them voice again. And so that's what decolonization, or when somebody says we should decolonize the curriculum, is really what it's all about.
So decolonizing the curriculum is about removing the assumptions of Western superiority, or is that how it's presented? And then, what's the alternative to that?
Yeah,
what are post-colonial theorists trying to advocate for?
Yeah, in fact, I just read an article by Lindsay right before I got on, and what he's often asking, it's very perplexed, because what he's asking three questions, or what colonizers are asking three questions. Number one, what's the curriculum? Two, what could possibly be meant by decolonizing it? Three, how did the curriculum come to be colonized? So those are the three things. So, what's the curriculum? What could possibly be meant by decolonizing it? And then how should the curriculum come to be colonized? And so, basically words like, racism or justice, it really kind of it operates from a white kind of oppressive mindset. So when you're reading these texts and you're looking at it from a white perspective, your view of oppression or racism is going to be vastly different in its definition than somebody that has been the recipient of racism or been the recipient of slavery, for example. And so decolonizing is trying to get to the original, I guess, the person that was colonized, if that makes sense, to get to the original perspective of their view. So that's really what it's trying to do overall.
Okay. Yeah.
Hope I explained that okay. Yeah.
I hope some people could follow that. But yeah, no, the one of the things the book mentions, Pluckrose and Lindsay, is that Edward Said, who's really considered the father of postcolonial theory, that he was heavily reliant upon the work of Frantz Fanon, who wrote The Wretched of the Earth. And it says, to Fanon, by 1961, colonialism represented above all else a systematic denial of the humanity of colonized people, so central to this theme to Fanon's analysis that he speaks throughout of the literal erasure of people's identity and dignity. And so the idea was to be deeply critical and openly revolutionary of Western colonialism. And then, of course, he was not postmodern in his approach, which Edward Said was. And so he applies it differently. But Said is basically taking what Fanon had articulated and just applying it in a postmodern way, which is why we get James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose saying this is really the first example of applied postmodernism. And then that becomes sort of the foundation for the other theories that follow: queer theory, gender studies, critical race theory, etc.
Yeah.
So,
and I should say this too, that this movement is really about activism. So if I could, So what decolonizing the curriculum is really about is it's the assumption that I have to read all things as a dynamic of systemic power. So that all society has been fit into these decisions. And I need to go in and disrupt these dynamics because the oppressor and the oppressed, I have to disrupt that so that I can equip students with knowledge of the mindset of these people that were defined as vulgar by the oppressors. Okay. So I want to get into, the mindset or the critical consciousness of the people that had lived under the oppressors, really. So the decolonizing is trying to get rid of that and to, show show what I, the mindset of these people, which is in itself is not it's in itself is a noble task. Yeah.
Right. I was just going to say, is there something redeemable about this approach? I mean, one of the things that I was thinking or reading about with postcolonial theory is that really Said was just noticing that when he was trying to teach about, feminism or gender studies, all he could find were resources written by white men. Right. And so you have like the women's studies and all you have is examples of white men talking about women and what they think about women and their place in life. So there is some truth to the idea of, can we trust when all of the evidence or all of the research has been done by one demographic of society? Isn't there going to be some bias involved in their explanation of, our world and our culture? But of course, the danger is assuming that just by adding more voices, you now get rid of the bias, because there is no way of, we're all biased and we're all going to bring that bias into it. And so can I trust a female author who's talking about her situation and status in life just because she's female and just because she has a perspective that's different from mine? It doesn't mean that she's less biased. Right. In fact, she might be more biased in her presentation of it. So what Lindsay and Pluckrose say is that no, we need to have those various views, and diversity is not the problem, right? A diversity of views is not the problem, but what we do to critique those views is important. How we assess what is true or not is going to be through empirical evidence, right? Can we study and research the philosophy that's being portrayed, and then understand really where the truth lies, which is probably somewhere taking from several different views. But anyways, the idea is that there is a truth out there. There is a philosophy that we can all accept, And of course, Pluckrose and Lindsay are liberal, promoting just a secular kind of worldview that would rely upon science, empirical evidence.
Yeah.
And of course, I think we could critique some of that from a Christian worldview and say that's not the only thing we need to be considering here, right? Which is, it's almost, like we need to go beyond what colonialism was attempting to do, which was just promote Western values and recognize that Christianity itself is part of Western values. It's part of what shaped Western values. And it itself is good, but we cannot remove Christianity from it and promote it. So I'll talk more about that later on.
Yeah,
I was reading a little bit of that from Bovink, but we're getting ahead.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, that's okay. No, I was thinking, I like what you said earlier. Is there some redeemable things about it? I mean, because Edward Said, his book Orientalism, which is a very well written book. I mean, I've only read sections of it. I haven't read the whole thing, but I mean, he talks about, have you ever looked at a pamphlet of an ad to a different country, and if you look at, like, if you're going to go to Bali, or if you're going to go to Vietnam, or if you're going to go somewhere like the Orient, usually what you often will see is something really exotic, and all of these treasures and these wondrous magical caves, and what is the ad doing? Well, the ad is actually communicating, in a sense, what white men, like, especially after Napoleon, when he conquered a lot of this stuff, what his concept, when he conquered some of these lands, he brought back a significant portion of the Orient to France. And so a lot of people kind of had that in their mind, that, oh, this is the Orient. This is Egypt. When I go to Egypt, it's all about, these artifacts. And there's a disconnect there. And Syed was really critiquing that, because he was saying, there's a disconnect when you actually talk to the people. That's radically different. They're not all exotic, than the people that actually went in there and took all these artifacts. And so what the book was it asked some really good questions, which is, is there a separation between these two groups? And I think we could say yes. We could say, there definitely are some real interests there that are totally contradictory. But what postcolonialists want to do, they want to develop on that, and they want to keep going. And they want to, like, can we hear the voice of these people? But I don't want to jump way ahead. That's because when we get to the close reading aspect of it, we start to get to the point where, as a philosophy, as it starts to calcify, we begin to see some of the serious problems. But I think originally it came from a good intention. My understanding of it. Yeah.
Well, and I don't know if you want to reference the book you brought up earlier, but while you're thinking about that, I thought I would read this quote, because one of the things I wanted to address too was not just to explain what post-colonial theory is, but that in its beginnings it was not defined well. It was almost incomprehensible. In fact, the original kind of advocates of this, and one of the authors here that is Homi Bhabha, who is one of the noteworthy postmodern examples and writers of post-colonial theory. And she said, she wrote a sentence here. I believe it's a she, right?
I think so. Yes. Yeah.
Bhabha is arguably the most deconstructive of the prominent post-colonialist scholars, having been influenced primarily by Lacan and Derrida. He focuses, never mind, so it's a he. Sorry. All right, so Homi Bhabha,
you're right.
he's writing, and he only was beaten out by Judith Butler, according to this section of his book, for the worst sentence or bad writing contest in 1998. He won second prize for philosophy and literature's bad writing contest. I thought this was pretty funny. Anyway, so this is what it says. If for a while the rise of desire is calculable for the uses of discipline, soon the repetition of guilt, justification, pseudoscientific theories, superstition, spurious authorities, and classifications can be seen as the desperate effort to normalize formally the disturbance of a discourse of splitting that violates the rational, enlightened claims of its enunciatory modality. So that's a really
that's
incomprehensible sentence.
It is. But if you so going back, I mean, because I think it's good to jump ahead a little bit. I mean, I want to make a connection here, because
Sure.
when we start talking about, Edward Said's Original Intention and writing some of those books, we then go into Spivak's, who's the next postmodernist, and what he argues for is subalterns, which is colonialized people of subordinate status. They have no access to speech. And what she calls this is strategic essentialism. In other words, essentialism is a linguistic tool where you need to try to apply the same sense of the monolithic group identity as an act of resistance, suspending individuality and in-group diversity within the subordinated group for the purpose of promoting common goals through a common identity. In other words, trying to get to that core. That's really the concept of essentialism, is trying to define the categories correctly. This belief that we should try to understand what's taught in the traditional ideas and what's taught from the prevalent culture, and to try to make that distinction. And so what Bahaba is trying to do is, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, is the mind reading. Because if the mind reading is permeating the categories of the oppressed, then racist, sexist jokes told by colonizers are going to be not taken nearly as seriously by them as the people that were oppressed. So this is where you start to see the influx of postmodernism like really creep in, because this good question, which I still think is a good question, now they're starting to say, okay, these are two different people and they have two totally views of reality. And if they have two completely different views of reality, we then need to start kind of decolonizing these texts over here, the white person's text. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but these people see the world differently than these people. So this is where we start to see the influx of just some of the later critical race theory, whiteness studies versus blackness studies and all this other stuff. This is really where it's starting to kind of separate and diverge a little bit. And that's why I think this chapter was really helpful in seeing how this progressed, I suppose. So I don't know if you want to say anything to that.
Well, no, let's jump right on to that and talk about how the mindsets did, if you're okay with that, going on to page 76, where they express some of the various, or at least the way this colonial mindset has transitioned to a postmodern or applied postmodern mindset. So I'll just read the statements, because it's taking the idea that, here's the Western colonial mindset that would say Westerners are rational and scientific, while Asians are irrational and superstitious. Therefore, Europeans must rule Asia for its own good. And that's the Western colonial mindset. Right. Then they would define the liberal mindset as saying all humans have the capacity to be rational and scientific, but individuals will vary widely. Therefore, all humans must have all opportunities and freedoms. So that's obviously the position that Pluckrose and Lindsay are advocating for. And then they would say postmodern mindset says this, that the West has constructed the idea that rationality and science are good in order to perpetuate its own power and marginalize non-rational, non-scientific forms of knowledge production from elsewhere. So now you've got a massive shift away from liberal mindset, to saying that really even the ideas of rationality and science are fraught with problems with colonial thought. And so therefore they should be rejected. And we should replace them with non-scientific, non-rational forms of thought. And then not only that, now you have the applied postmodern mindset, which would say, therefore, we must devalue white ways of knowing for belonging to white Westerners and promote Eastern ones. And so we gotta start reducing or eliminating, canceling various forms of colonial thought that we've imbibed through our education, through our curriculum. we need to replace that with Eastern thought and elevate those voices, which then leads to decolonize everything. And
it's good. That was good. That's a good summary. Keep going.
Well, decolonize everything and research justice. It's the thought that really to provide a just and fair curriculum, you need to stop using the typical Western curriculum, the typical thought of previous, the books that we've read and appreciated, even including Dr. Seuss. Right? We've got to cancel those and replace them.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Any thoughts on that, or?
No, I think that was really, because I think that's why I wanted to really slow down to kind of spend a lot of time on just like, okay, if you believe the oppressed kind of came in there and it makes a lot more sense to me on why this would eventually lead to some type of activism. So I can hear this particular voice per se, which is kind of what the mindset of where people like Spivak is really coming from, who is the proponent of like strategic essentialism, which because it's more of what they're doing is not so much they don't want to uphold research methods in the way that you and I understand research methods as much as promote the that equality of these voices are on the same term, or excuse me, have just as much of a platform as the white voices that have been in the platform for thousands of years. And so now what's interesting though is that they're not willing to they're not just wanting to put it on the same platform. They're actually wanting to get rid of everyone from Churchill to Shakespeare to Dr. Seuss and whatnot, and just put these on the platform. And it's funny because I actually I love books and I love going to bookshops. And one of the things I've actually noticed at my local bookshop, for example, I'm seeing less and less and less of the classic literature. So when I used to go there, even like 5 years ago or 3 years ago, they used to have a pretty big classic section. Everything from, Herman Melville to, Friedrich Nietzsche to Chaucer and, you name it. So that section now is about that big, and it's been just taken over by minority voices, which again, I'm fine trying to understand minority voices, but what it's basically doing is drowning out because this is considered, these were the oppressors. And so I have to, it's kind of like the concept of, defund the police or whatnot. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but like, we have to completely uproot everything and start all over again. And we've been so poorly influenced and traumatized by, hundreds of years of these oppressors that the only escape from it is total escape. Or excuse me, the only way to get away from it is just complete escape from it, and to make sure that we don't see it, we don't smell it, which leads to the whole cancelization of speech. Because eventually what we'll be talking about is why they believe in censorship. It's because one of the reasons why we're seeing so many people advocate for censorship is that reason, is that if I bring these ideas back into the forefront, well, what's going to happen? We're going to get colonization all over again.
Right.
That's the binary way of how they're viewing reality. So therefore, through my activization, I have to not just promote these voices, but cancel these other voices as well. So which leads to decolonize everything.
And that's really where I think they kind of end this chapter. And we wanted to try to keep this shorter. So I'll move into that last section. But then maybe we can summarize and give our own thoughts on the chapter overall. But as far as page 86 and 87, they do talk about the drive to decolonize everything. They give examples like decolonizing hair, English literature curricula, tear down paintings and smash statues, erase history while opening up revisionist discussions of it are particularly alarming. And then they mention when Winston Churchill, Joseph Conrad, and Rudyard Kipling become nothing more than symbols of racist imperialism, and their achievements and writings are too tainted to be acknowledged, we'll lose not only the potential for any nuanced discussion of history and progress, but also the positive contributions of the men themselves. And of course, that's happening now to literally everyone that we grew up reading, or the classic literature, like you said. It's all being challenged and questioned, whether it was really ever read to begin with, just to perpetuate Western colonial mindsets. But
which what they would say is the close reading of the text. So in a lot of when you get it like a degree nowadays, especially if you take a particular English class, they may have a class called close reading of oppressed text, something like that. So they're teaching you to read very, very, very closely on how certain language has integrated into some of these cultures, and to try, So this was very informative.
Yeah. Well, and I think a little bit, it does. They do a good job of bringing it to a close there when they kind of give two views, or at least the dangers and problems that this creates, because even among postmodern theorists, there is a critique of postcolonial theory in particular, because it does not allow for actual human rights abuses to be addressed. And the way they argue for this, they don't necessarily say that postcolonial theory has come under criticism from other postmodernists. I actually think they do in a couple of places, but I was learning about it myself when I was listening to another lecture on postcolonial theory. But they do say at the bottom of page 86 and page 87, they give two common claims of postcolonial theorists. One is that postcolonial theorists insist that getting a non-Western culture to accept that there are human rights abuses taking place locally requires colonizing that culture with Western notions of human rights and their violation. So the idea of trying to assess human rights abuses, first of all, requires a colonial mindset, or a Western mindset. So you already have to colonize a culture in order to be able to critique a particular human rights abuse. And so they don't do it. They won't critique foreign nations in that way. Secondly, though, any abuse that they find, any theoretical abuse that could be out there, is really just the result of colonization, of past colonization.
Right.
And it's like this catch-22, right? You can't address it. And if there is any real abuse going on, it's only because of colonialism. And so we gotta continue our project here of eliminating the Western mindset. Yeah. And so that's the danger, again, just to bring it back, is just to say, like, what do you do when there's actual human rights abuses taking place, when women are mistreated, or, when minorities are genuinely being exterminated? I mean, how do you address that?
Well, they use a very brilliant tactic, and that's dialectical philosophy, which is the belief that I could hold on to two totally opposite truths at the same time and be okay with it. So postmodernism does adopt a lot of that. And I think that's the thing. They do a tactic of contradiction is okay, which is, I want to advocate for standpoint theory, which is the belief that knowledge comes from lived experience of a different identity group, and fight for that. And be okay if there's a significant amount of violence in this particular country, but blame Western civilization over here for the propagation of that violence, which is really kind of an interesting view of original sin. I don't want to get into that, but a good example of that would be Islam. I think that's the first thing that comes in, because I have a lot of friends who are much more liberal. I have gay friends. I have friends who are not believers, who are getting away from a lot of the far left because they refuse to kind of critique the components of Islam, for example. Right. I've got a friend that was a strong feminist who served in certain African countries, and when she brought up some of the concerns that she saw with rape and molestation and what was the other one, the cutting off
female circumcision. She almost got fired from her job, and when she was taking a class at her university, and just kind of threw her all off that I can't bring any of this up. And she was a long lifetime feminist. And so, but you can't bring that up
but because it's you know, you're looking at things as right or wrong or binary, and you're making value judgments as a Westerner, and you're putting that on the Orient, and on these particular cultures, and that's considered wrong, and you should hold on to both of these contradictions. So, I mean, it's you can see why you pull your hair out sometimes when you read some of this, because the conversation is so limited. Going back on what you said about research justice, I mean, they even, yes, you're right, because you should redefine the term research, because it's not about objectivity. They want to avoid logical arguments. They want to avoid reasoned arguments. They want to avoid logical contradiction. That's what real research wants to do. That real research wants to produce reasoned arguments, avoid logical contradiction, and just wants to provide evidence for claims. Right. But if you do any of that, if you provide evidence or logic, again, that's Western mindset. I don't have to do that, which is why you get the mess that Imran Kendi is saying and Jamar Tisby, that I could just lived experience, just total bullshit. And, that has no actual, data to prove any of my claims. But if I say anything, I'm going against that lived experience, and I'm not allowed to use logic. I'm not allowed to use reason. I'm not allowed to ask for this research, because it's all about activization.
Well, it's the assumption that if you critique the lived experience, the assumption is that lived experience is normative for all people of that race or that minority, right? Or of that particular, subset of culture. And so that lived experience, you can't critique it. And if you do, you're just right. You're acknowledging your own bias, your own Western bias.
Yeah, unless you're in the group themselves, like this. That's what essentialism is all about. They can argue amongst themselves, but somebody outside can't. Yeah, that's 100%.
Yeah. Well, okay. So one of the last things I wanted to point out was I was reading. I'm reading this biography on Herman Bavinck, which is one of my favorite theologians. It's a critical biography by James Eglinton, and he actually mentions how Bavinck's approach on colonialism, because he became a parliamentarian in the early 20th century, and so in 1911 he's advocating for Western colonial expansion, but he's advocating for it in such a way that it does not remove Christianity from the agenda, right? And that the thing was, he acknowledged that colonialism was really presenting a gospel, if you will, that was just capitalism and Enlightenment values, which I think probably Lindsay and Pluckrose would agree with, like that's actually a good thing or a healthy thing. But what, or maybe not capitalism, they might critique that, but that was what was happening early on. And so even Bavinck had some criticisms for that. And he was saying, here's a quote from a speech he gave in 1911. It was a public lecture he gave in Amsterdam. And he says this: European culture can be a blessing to the peoples of the world, but it can also be a curse if, as is actually the case, it undermines the heathens' indigenous religion and gives them no other and better faith in its place. It impoverishes them internally more than it enriches them. So he's saying, look, we can try to critique their and replace their current religious values with Enlightenment values, but we don't give them a full world view that religion affords. And so therefore, because our Western values and are actually shaped by Christianity is what influenced these Western values, then we cannot eliminate Christianity from what we're offering to other nations. And so he's actually kind of critiquing it and saying that, right, yeah, Christianity shaped culture, and therefore it must remain a central aspect of what's being promoted. I thought
Bavinck was so ahead of the times. He was my favorite theologian in seminary as well. He was by far. I still have all of his works right up there. He's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, they're still writing more. I mean, this biography is an excellent edition if you want to get it. And then there's actually, they're working on his ethics as well. So you got the the Reformed dogmatics, and now you have the Reformed ethics, which I think is going to have 2 or 3 volumes. The first one's already out.
Wow.
One other quote from him, and then I'm done. But he says, if these mighty peoples, speaking of East Indies, China, or Japan, acquire our civilization without Christianity, of which it is the fruit, they borrow from us the weapons with which they will fight us in the future. This is important because he says the danger grows all the more earnest while Buddhism and Mohammedanism, which is, he's talking about Islam, have recently been awoken into a new life and secretly equipped themselves for a struggle with the Christian faith. And so whatever their tradition, he says, what we do when we promote Western, colonialism without Christianity, we actually are creating a global struggle, or we're setting ourselves up for a global struggle between Buddha, Muhammad, and Christ. And so it's going to lead to this massive, these massive global scale consequences of religion, which frankly, I think, again, he rightly predicted.
I don't know. Yeah, I may take that differently. I mean, I think, but yeah, I respect it. Yeah.
Either way, he's just saying, to close it out, to tie it together, he's just saying that promoting Western values without the gospel will result in consumerism and religious violence on a global scale.
Yeah. So I would agree with that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I wanted to, I mean, I want to, if it's okay, I want to close out too. I think one of the things that really stuck with this particular chapter is it's a very dangerous patronizing theory. And I liked that because there's something about contempt and pity that is involved in a lot of the people that want to just decolonize. And because I think, if you want to change specifics about the curriculum, like just getting rid of John Stuart Mill with Ta-Nehisi Coates, I mean, that's what you're doing there is you're actually preventing people from truly learning and having serious education. And, I think that we should be looking for methodological success wherever it's found. I mean, I think if it's through the Chinese, like the Ming Dynasty that thrived, and actually we saw a lot of progress during that time, that's fantastic. If it was through the Muslim, I don't know if I'm reading a book right now that after the Christians burned a whole lot of libraries, a lot of Muslim scholars actually kept a lot of those texts. And thankfully it was the first, some of those texts showed up much later, which started the Renaissance. The Muslims actually are responsible for keeping a lot of the actual Hebrew scriptures, so I think we praise God for that. Well, a lot of Christians actually were burning a lot of that stuff at one point. African culture has been responsible for a huge amount of progress. We have to understand that Greek and African culture was the founder of logic and reason and Athens, and was the first time that people started asking these diverse questions about democracy. So what this is doing is not just looking at particular tribes, but we should, and propping them up. You're actually keeping people from attaining a knowledge about the world that can actually significantly help them. And you are seeing that. You're seeing that, like there's a thing that's going on in South Africa called Science Must Fall movement, and basically it's promoting, from what I understand, it's a part of a broader decolonization movement. And all it's wanting to do is it doesn't trust any of the science. Well, okay, now you're not getting vaccinations. You're not getting the medical treatment that, that these people actually need. These things actually can happen. If you ignore some of the abuse that's going on in some of these Muslim countries to gays and lesbians and to women and to little girls, you're not being an activist for change. You're actually keeping them from actually receiving true justice. And so, I mean, it's a patronizing theory if you take it all the way over here. I do think that Syed had some great points. I don't think you have to throw out everything. But this discourse analysis where everything is just these predictable structures of power and knowledge, or oppressor and oppress, and just putting everything under these categories where I just cancel all that out, it could very well lead you into keeping people from just attaining the ability to read properly and the ability to understand science and reason. These make us better people. It's not my tribe versus your tribe. It actually brings us together. I mean, medical technology has always thrived in open societies where we can all dialogue, but with the assumption that we have to have a rigor to research, like solid research. We should invite that. Yeah. And good research. I think that's, anyway. Yeah.
Good summary. Good thoughts. Yeah. I agree. I think we're,
and somebody, Ben Lewis said, great content. Thanks, Ben. I appreciate that. And he said to agree with various colonizations throughout history. But we need to know it, learn, and critique it. Yes, I agree. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. Okay. Well, we went 41 minutes. Oh, well, that's okay. It was both of our fault. It's not just my fault. Sometimes it's just my fault. Sometimes it's just
pretty much your fault.
Was it really?
Yeah. We're going to have to cancel. One of us is going to get canceled on this at some point here.
Anyway,
okay. All right. It's good talking to you. Peace.
Peace.